we've been working with companies, helping them understand and improve their engineering culture. And today we're just going to have a chat about how we've been doing that.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? When everyone wants to improve their culture, have happy teams, have performant teams, but how do you even sort of assess your culture? It's one of those things that culture is something that you experience subjectively in the moment, and you want to take. You want to take the temperature, you want to measure it, you want to understand it, you want to improve it, but how do you do that?
Yeah, that's the challenge, because culture is, it's very real time, and culture is a combined reflection of the experience of everybody who's a part of that ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do we get in there? How do we figure out? How do we capture that reflection in a way that's useful for people to then be able to actually understand it and see what you can do to improve the culture, and ultimately why do you want to do it? Why do you want to improve that culture?
Yeah. So what we've done, realizing that it's quite a difficult thing, realizing that it's something that everybody wants to work on and improve, we've tried to make it as simple as possible for a company to get a visual idea of sentiment within engineering teams, but in a very sort of well thought out, well structured way, and we support. So we do it with a couple of ways. We've developed a survey based approach that makes people that prods and probes and gets people talking. But what we found most valuable to augment that approach is conversations, is a dialogue with engineers, and we found that people really want to talk when they're given the space to reflect on their experience at work, what's working well, what's not working well. They'll talk about it with us in a way that they might not necessarily feel comfortable in expressing if they're talking to their manager or the CTO, for example.
Yeah, that third party, it's kind of like a third party advantage, right? It gives that sort of separation of concerns. We do provide sort of anonymity around any particular details, right? We never show who said what. It's never, this person said that about this other person. That is all kind of kept to the side.
Yeah.
And the sentiment behind it is what's captured and aggregated. And like you say, we found that's really powerful is being able to, you start with the survey so that everybody's got this same sort of context, right? You get all this quantitative data essentially, but then we use that to start conversations. Mm-hmm. There's a conversation starter, an enabler, and it gives that framework for everybody to be able to talk around these same things in a very similar way. Yeah.
So we'll talk in a minute about what's in the survey and what kind of questions, what sort of things we're trying to find out. But it might be an idea to sort of think about, well, what is it that what's the end result? What's the outcome? Where does this lead to? And really, it's a way of taking multiple perspectives on teams, individuals, and the organisation as a whole, and showing graphs, showing data, and supporting that with the themes that we're identifying. So making sense really of what is important and what isn't important in terms of people's experiences, and the way that we do that with the through the organizational lens, the team lens, and then the sort of self lens, we get these three different aspects on culture.
Yeah, that's right. So we've seen we get this reflection, we said, so the survey gives this reflection of what's happening and how people are experiencing working life at the company. And say through having these different lenses, we've found it's actually absolutely fascinating how much people, how they experience life in these different ways, right? So and different teams sometimes will have a different focus on, they'll struggle with individual aspect in one lens, and then another team will say, actually, we find the problem actually comes from a more organizational sort of lens. And it really helps us, and the companies understand the root causes of the problems that are being then reflected in the culture. Where is it coming from? So therefore, what can we do about it?
Yeah, and there's this kind of proximity angle. I think it's the trend that we see. Like, the further away you get from the person, and therefore the less control that they will have over a certain aspect of culture, the lower it scores. So people will often rate their own kind of influences and impacts on culture, and higher than they would at the team level, and then higher again than they would at the organisational level. And that tends to come through quite consistently.
Yes, no, it's very good point. And I think it shows why it's so important to be consistent and intentional at that organisational level, that the little bit further upstream, that helps really align people sort of further down the stream.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like culture, I think, works in fractals. If you're not cohesive and aligned at the executive level, then it's much harder to get cohesive and aligned at the individual team level. It's all a reflection of that runs through an organisation, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It very much it trickles down. So the culture really is the source, and it starts at the top, and it trickles down. And we've seen that the culture can be impacted at all the stages, right? From making business decisions to making technical decisions to making individual team decisions. Right. That all of those impact and are reflected in the culture. And the culture then, funnily enough, so it's a reflection of reality, but then it's also a prediction of the future trajectory.
It's also there's a very high, and this is reported in a number of areas, in the DevX world, and for example in the book Accelerate, there's the authors draw a strong link between Ron Westrom's work on culture, which influences our survey quite considerably, and how that perspective of culture is actually predictive of organizational performance. And you almost it's I sometimes find that when you talk about culture, people have different views of, is it this kind of woolly thing? Is it an HR thing? Is it, what are we talking about? It's not something tangible that you can kind of see and control and deal with. And some people see it as quite fluffy and teamy and that those kind of warm fuzzies, for example. But I think it's actually there's a lot of work that's been done, especially within the engineering field, that ties culture to this hard commercial thing of performance and delivery, and the things that companies want. So you come at it from both the human experience end of it and then the commercial benefit end of it.
Yeah, I think they are very, very much connected, and we are starting to see. I think it's becoming more and more understood and accepted, I think, within the industry. That culture, as we say, sort of culture is predictive of performance, which is then kind of predictive of the business value at the end, right? It's one of the value streams that we map out.
Yeah.
Is the organisational effectiveness that influences the technical excellence and the flow you can get there, and the quality you deliver, which then influences the business value that's delivered.
Yeah. Shall we talk about some of the specifics about how we've devised our approach to questioning and why we've gone down that route?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So, I mean, you mentioned earlier, right, that the survey. Well, first thing we do is there's a survey for all engineers to complete within a team.
Mm-hmm.
It takes about 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
There are a total of 72 questions.
Mm-hmm.
They're all on that sort of Likert scale, right, of the 1 to 5. Disagree to agree.
Yeah.
And so we have, the questions are separated out into 3 main themes, which are aligned to self-determination theory.
Yeah.
So mastery, autonomy, and purpose.
Yeah. So we've taken those 3 main areas and then interpreted what they mean from an engineering perspective. So, for example, when we're talking about mastery, we're talking about craftsmanship. We're talking about professionalism and an environment for learning and getting better. When we're talking about autonomy, we're talking about decision making. We're talking about information flows. We're also thinking about whether people have the right sort of clarity and information to be able to act autonomously, whether they have the right skills and tooling and environments to work with. So everything that feeds into that autonomy is considered. And when we're talking about purpose, I think that's the most sort of human of the categories, which is it's that sense of meaning, that sense of belonging, that sense of being part of something bigger than yourself. But it also comes into leadership, so that's where we sort of delve into people's experience of leadership. And so our 72 questions are along those categories, and within those 72 questions, that's where we sort of delve into the organisational perspective, and the team perspective, and the self perspective.
Yeah, that's right. So we've got, within those 3 themes of mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Actually, we call them categories because within that within each category we have 4 themes, which gives us the total of 12 themes that we run the survey around. And then in each one of those 12 themes is where we have there are 6 questions, right, for each one, looking at, you say, the organisational lens, the individual lens, and the team lens.
Yeah.
And that helps create this really, really well-rounded picture of the individual experience of almost the entire culture, and it captures, it was said, from the end to end of that value stream. It's not just how is it in my team, right? It's not this little microcosm. It's like, how are things external to that impacting my experience, which is it's all part of the culture. And someone CTO raised this with us recently, right? It's all very well and good just understanding your culture, but it doesn't act as a silo. It's part of this bigger thing, and we actually see that reflected in the results of these surveys.
Yeah, and when you say you see that reflected, I mean that's where we put a lot of time into the visuals and the statistical output of what of people's answers to questions. So we know what's the consistency like in the answers. Are there outliers that are really important? What are the trends? And then we present that on in various formats that are easy then to sort of understand, And we also take our discussions with engineers, and we use our main themes and relate those to what the output of the conversations. And we do a thematic analysis on those, so which is really just putting them into a spreadsheet, so that we can then see what's coming up regularly, what are the trends per team, or what are we seeing, and then that helps us to kind of pull that all together in a quite a detailed. I mean, after it's all been anonymized, quite a detailed insight into what are your engineers saying. And I feel like that is probably the most valuable part of what we're doing, bringing it together with those anecdotes from our conversations with engineers.
Yeah, I think it's that it is the combination of the quant data from the survey and the qual data, bringing those two together.
Yeah.
Right. So you get like the stories behind the statistics.
Yeah.
As it were, that's kind of really powerful. And what we see helps is that previous to this, people will have anecdotes or little snippets there, and that the quant data from the survey actually shows. It gives you kind of hard data to kind of to see the extent of a particular issue that you may kind of be aware of, right? It's kind of, is that a big problem, or is it not, or is it just kind of a minor blip that you're hearing, or is it indicative of something bigger? And again, that quant data is actually really useful for being able to just report upstream, if you like. Yeah. So if you need to go to the exec and say, these are some of the problems that we've been having, and some of it's being from the top down. We now have the quant data. We've got the data to be able to say, you wanted us to improve our delivery. Here's what we need you to improve to help us.
Yeah. And that then leads on to our recommendations about, we can now sort of get a grasp of what the engineering culture is like in real terms, gritty sort of real terms. How do we change that? And I think that the quality of the data that we tend to produce goes way beyond the stuff that would come out of kind of team health checks or performance reviews, and I think those things can. I mean, they've got their place, but they can sometimes be a little bit contrived. And I think that between us, we've got a real knack of being able to, because we've been engineers ourselves, we've been leaders ourselves. We've seen these issues, countless times before from our own perspectives, and we're able to kind of create that space for a natural dialogue and a natural conversation to come out. And I think that it's quite a relief, I think, for some people to have that space and to be able to talk.
Yes, yeah. We've seen, some people just don't want to shut up, basically. We've seen it's sort of finally kind of some of the conversations we've had almost felt a little bit like therapy sessions.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. People just want to get this kind of all these things off their chest that they haven't had the space to do so beforehand.
Yeah. And I think it's also a good sign that we found that we've called our company Human-Centric engineering, and I think it's a really good sign when a CTO brings us in. It's it's sending a good message to the engineers that, look, we care about your experience as human beings, right? And these guys are here to kind of, there's no engineering organization out there that doesn't have cultural struggles. And it's a tough industry. There's a lot of burnout, and there's recently been a lot of redundancies and a whole host of other problems. There's always pressure. So there's always ways to improve culture, and that's our starting point. Doing our engineering culture index survey and analysis, and saying, right, here's your starting point. These are the things that can be worked on. These are your high leverage points that you can pull on to get the biggest results.
Yeah. Well, like I say, like you mentioned earlier, it's really easy actually just to get started and to get those first insights, right? That survey, it's about 20 minutes per engineer, and then comes back to us, and we create all the visual reporting, from the heat maps and the spider diagrams to that, just sort of the very high level metric of this is where you are in general for your overall culture. This is what it looks like at the org lens and the team lens, the individual lens, and just highlighting what's going really well, right? What are people kind of leaning into? How they experiencing? Well, what are they experiencing is really good. What do they love about working there?
Yeah.
And then where are the challenges, right?
Yeah.
You say what are those leverage points?
Yeah.
And it's that, and it's relatively quick and easy, to get to that point, through, the first point, just the survey, and then you can, of course, go deeper with those conversations, where we typically allowed half an hour to 45 minutes per engineer to dive deeper and get a real good thematic analysis.
Yeah. And then from there on, I think from that basis of having had that discussion, having given people the opportunity to express themselves in that way, they're then on board with changes that might come from that. And so much of culture, I think, and one of the reasons we do it through the org lens, the team lens, and the self lens, a lot of culture happens from our own decisions, how we show up, right, with our colleagues, and how we, and just having that awareness of like, okay, there's often a thing about, well, it's just a system and I can't, haven't got control over it, but we are the system. And, there are certainly at the self level and at the team level, there's a lot that can be initiated just through how you show up and relate to your work, to your colleagues. So I think that's, we see that sort of awareness and that sort of intent from what we do.
Yeah.
And I think the other final thing that we ought to mention is that we've also made the Engineering Culture Index open source. We ask for feedback on questions. Last time we ran it, I think we score very highly in terms of how people think, the appropriateness of the questions and the clarity of the questions and that kind of thing. And we have made slight tweaks and changing the versions. And I think you want to get engineers on board with this. It's for their interests, and that's one of the reasons why we've made it open source. So that if there's a question that you think sucks, if it doesn't address what it's trying to address, well, do a pull request, and we'd be happy to consider changes and improvements to it's how it can build over time.
Yeah, absolutely. If something if it's ambiguous, or there's a loaded term or a triggering word in there, that's what the pull requests are for.
Yeah. Cool. And future plans for the Engineering Culture Index. We're talking about platforms and things like that.
Yeah. So we're looking at building a platform to be able to just run the Engineering Culture Index for yourself, internally for your team, like once or twice a year, just to keep that keep that awareness really high. Make sure you're able to focus on the most relevant bits at any point. Because again, we see the culture as a predictor of essentially performance and productivity and business value. If you're on top of that and you're aware of what's going on and make those changes, you're just much more effective than if you wait, even for, say, where the DORA metrics, for example, if you've got those, you're about 6 months ahead of those with your culture metrics.
Yeah.
So you can keep way ahead just by keeping on top of your culture index.
Yeah, so Dora is a kind of a lagging metric, really, for and I think we're trying to position the engineering culture index as a leading metric, and the two relate to one another as part of the flow of work. So yeah, cool.
Okay. Anything else?
And I think we've covered most of, there's a lot of depth to what we've done. We've put an awful lot of work into it. We've put a lot of theory into it, and we've tried to make it as simple to use and administer and engage with as possible. So that, because culture is a hard thing to crack. Everybody wants to crack it. I know so many engineers who are really good engineers, but they have become sort of almost apathetic and feeling that they're in a system that doesn't work for them, and that they can't do their best work. And I think leadership and it's all about creating the right kind of conditions for engineers to work at their best, and that's where all of this leads to. It's, well, okay, what are the factors, what are the aspects of that, and how can I create those conditions? What can I do to achieve that?
Yes.
Cool.